hi aki ana te atikura, he tio, he huka, he hauhu, tihei mauri ora.
Thank you. Do we have any apologies? We have Emma Kenzie for lateness.
I haven't. Carol, have you any apologies?
No, the Mia, sorry.
Mia.
Neil Brown.
Neil Brown.
He may come later, but he's not 100% sure
Okay.
if this meeting will finish.
The next item is extraordinary business, and we have had a late letter email from what they call the Green Street. Where have I found it?
Cool, Carol.
Friends of the Green
The
Street.
Friends of Green Street. So it's a bit late for us to do much about that, but I think we'll receive the letter. And does someone there from Green Street like to read it out?
Yeah,
Daryl?
Carol will.
Or Darren, if you're prepared, we'll just read it out and then we can table it. So if you're happy to do it now. Hopefully that microphone's going to work for you. That's Daryl Buttrick from Green Street. I think you're familiar with Daryl.
Are we right now? Yep. This is a report to the Zone Committee, April 23rd, 2024, from the Friends of the Green Street Creek. During the last part of the summer 2024, the Green Street Creek ran dry. This was an unusual event as the creek had not run dry for perhaps 40 odd years. The Green Street Creek is a 10 kilometres long, well-established freshwater way that acts as a refuge habitat for breeding and survival when the Ashburton River runs dry, meaning the North Ashburton. Unfortunately, while the creek was running low dry, much aquatic life was lost or had to be relocated. This included fish, eels, crayfish, inanga, native whitebait. We were grateful to the Fish and Game New Zealand and all the other locals who assisted in this rescue process. Whilst we acknowledge the reason for the Green Street Creek running low and then dry may be in part due to the declining subterranean water tables in the area, it's also linked to the requirement to maintain flow rates in other water bodies such as the Shays Creek and the North Branch of the Ashburton River. Historically, farmers have kept the Green Street Creek flowing by diverting to the creek, which seems to have little, if any, effects on other waterways. No one wishes to see the creek run dry again. We seek to work alongside ECAN to establish a sustainable and workable process whereby the creek can be kept alive as well as keeping appropriate flows in the Ashburton River and O'Shea's Creek. We see a requirement for a group of Green Street residents, including farmers, to work in a mutually respectful way with a group of water specialists from ECAN to monitor and maintain Green Street waterways and for all parties to be able to take appropriate action as soon as required. Simply applying and regulating minimal flow data does not always work in practice. It seems apparent that our changing climatic conditions also require adaptable regulations to prevent serious damage to our environment. That was written by Ian Hodge.
Thank you, Darryl. Well, I'll move that we accept this correspondence. Do I have a seconder? Clear? Thank you for that. All those in favour? Aye. Against? Carried. Is there any comments anyone would like to make pertaining to this letter? Oh, well, thank you for presenting it, Darryl, and I see Roger's here and everything. So that's obviously Green Street's going to come up and later on. So
Thank you.
Thanks very much. Register of interest, which you've got in front of your board papers there. So just keep those upgraded. Confirmation of the minutes of the last meeting. So they've been circulated.
Yeah, just one amendment under Ashburton Lyndhurst. It was ELI that undertook the judicial review. One could read that was almost like Ashburton Lyndhurst undertook it.
Okay.
It's an environmental law initiative or whatever they're called. Yeah.
So what page is that?
It's page 6.
Halfway down.
Just read that out again, Chris, please.
Under the heading, you've got Ashburn Lyndhurst.
Yes.
It's just the dot point before that, it's ELI undertook the judicial review.
Okay.
So you just want ELI put in front?
Yeah. Or Environmental Law Initiative.
I think that's what it is.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So with that amendment in there,
Oh, excuse me, Bill. At the Green Street, Ben Shearer was listed as an but he didn't attend.
okay.
As a presenter,
Oh,
Green
no.
Street representative, Ben Shearer wasn't here.
Well, Chris, as I wasn't at that meeting, and are you happy to move those meetings with the minutes with those two alterations? To have a seconder? Angela, all those in favour?
Aye.
Aye. Those against, carried. It's good. Correspondence, so we've got inward from Gender Spa, who has tentative resignation, which we have accepted. I've spoken to Jen, and she's enjoyed her time on the committee. She's got other projects on, and she just felt it was time that she moved on. So I'll write her a letter from the committee. So I'll move that we accept Jen's resignation. Seconder for that. Claire, all those in favour? Aye, against, carried, thank you. The other letter was the letter that we had written to Stephanie. Do we have anything back from that? I know that she's acknowledged receiving the letter, but has yet to reply. You haven't heard any more?
Tim's got some.
Oh, Tim. Yes, please. And then you can talk from there if it works. You're not too lonely there, eh?
Thank you, Chair. And just, I wanted to acknowledge the letter, and it has been received, and it's been received in-house, and we've been thinking about it. And in terms of a response, well, first of all, I've got a question. No, perhaps I'll answer it, and then I'll ask the question. In terms, so the letter, for, if you were aware, was around, given the substantial drought that's on and the stresses that that's putting on the community at the moment, a request that Environment Canterbury considers the way that it's working with community and so how we would take that into consideration. And there's no straightforward answer to that question. There are some things that we have definitely done, and if I take an example around Otu Wharakai, the Ashburton Lakes, and the work that's going on up there, and particularly the integrated plan work, we've made a call to say that as agencies involved in that work, we will continue on. But in terms of working with the farmers there, we're just saying, look, you concentrate on getting your farms in order and everything going well in that space, rather than being pulled into meetings and things, and we'll be back in touch in June to sort of think about how that carries on. So that's just one example, but the real point is that yes, we're very willing to consider it. It gets more difficult when it's in the consenting space, but we are very willing to accept it. And if people are feeling that whatever it might be, their interactions with Environment Canterbury, they just need to put some tai-ho on it and just think about it, then please do get in touch, and we will be, as considerate as we can be around that, and we're certainly well aware of it. So the question that I've got is, do you want a formal response to the Zone Committee, or are you comfortable with a response like I've just given? That's for you to decide. I'll leave that with you.
That's a good, thanks for replying, Tim, but I think we should have a formal response. As it was written, it doesn't have to be wordy, but just outline we've got it on record. Thank you. Yeah. Is there any comments anyone wants to make to Tim?
Yeah, Tim, one of the main focuses was on what was going on in Otu Wharakai at the time, and the farmers up there feel that a pause in the process would be appropriate. Now, if that is what you guys have been able to do, that would be nice to say that actually you have been able to slow the process down. That is all the response that I think we can expect, but it would be good to acknowledge that you actually have. I know you're doing other work in-house still, but those farmers who are still waiting for, are they going to be publicly notified consents or whatever, that is really what's giving them a fair bit of stress at the moment, as well as dealing with the drought.
Thank you for that, Chris. So we're up to the,
We're actually, Vision Business Stock, have we done the register of interest?
yes, we've done that. So we're just the update from,
Back from Tim.
yeah. So Tim, if you're ready, we'll have your update.
You're on camera there, is he?
Yeah, probably better.
Yeah, thanks. So Tim, I think everyone knows you're here, but you probably should just introduce yourself and your background, please, if you wouldn't mind.
Yep, thank you. And it's nice to be here in person. Last time I could see myself on this huge screen right behind you there, and it's nice to be here in person. So I'm Tim Davey. I'm the Director of Science at Environment Canterbury. But in a way, I'm not really here as the Director of Science. I'm here as a Director of Environment Canterbury from the ELT, and I'm representing the organisation, and please take it as such. I don't have a presentation, and I wasn't intending to talk for a long time. There is a memo that has been circulated. Has everybody had that? That is essentially what I'm talking around, and also just to acknowledge other people here, particularly Jen Rochford, and behind me here, who is in charge of our
I'm sorry,
compliance.
Tim. Jan, I'm sorry I didn't acknowledge you. I didn't see you there, but so welcome to the meeting. Yeah, so thanks, Tim.
The questions that were asked, we've had a go at answering them, but it's not meant that this is the definitive answer, and no more correspondence would be entered into. It is meant as a start to think about some of these things, but essentially it talks about the what was aimed at being achieved in the flow plan, which it depends what level you're talking about, but fundamentally it was about having more water in the Ashburton River. Whichever branch you're talking about, but having more water in the river is one of the key aims of what was being achieved, was being aimed for in the plan. And then the consent review was to bring consents in line. And many of you will remember that one of the reasons for doing that consent review was actually around equity. And it was to do with the... if you have a plan in place and you wait for consents to come in one by one, then what you actually end up with is a situation where the people who are last in the line, by pure luck, because it's really when their last consent was renewed, they get really good reliability. The people who've gone through their consent being renewed have to come in line with the plan. They get the minimum flow. They get worse reliability. The river actually gets no better, essentially. It's just that the other people get better reliability. So one of the reasons for doing a consent review at one time was an equity issue, saying, well, if we're going to do it, we're going to do it, and we're going to try and get more water into the river at one time. So that was part of the zone committee discussion, as many of you will remember, as to why we did that consent review. But the consent review was to bring consent surface water takes and the shallow groundwater near to the stream that have a direct effect on the streams into line with the plan. And that's what was achieved. That's not to say it was an easy process. It was a difficult process, and I appreciate, I think we all understand that it was difficult. It was difficult for the people involved. But fundamentally, it was about bringing the consents in line with the plan. That's been achieved. What we've had, of course, this year which is the first full year when it's been in place, is this very dry year, which I talked about last time I was here. You'll see there in point 4 about that, we've estimated that the river ran at above 6 cumecs for around 4 weeks longer than it would have at the new minimum flow restrictions. That's always a little bit of an estimate because you're trying to estimate what would have been taken. There's also time when the river flowed between 3 and 6, 3 being the previous minimum, and it would have been reduced more. So there's a longer term effect in there as well. So in terms of that simple statistic, the plan is achieving what it's setting out to do, acknowledging that there are consequences of that. So look, I mean, I probably don't really want to say a lot more than what's in the memo. I'm happy to take questions on it. In terms of the question, well, I'll just say one other thing, which is what I said last time when I was talking to you, that to do a full assessment of the effectiveness of a plan is a big job. It's not just, a few stats like I've just thrown out of, 4 weeks and things like that, because you have to start looking at, okay, what's the impact upon the river ecology, what's changed, and things like that. And that's a substantial job. That's why I'm not able to come back to you and say the definitive answer, have the plan objectives been achieved, except at that very high level, which is more water has been in the river, and that's one of the things that we were trying to achieve. The other thing about the plan effectiveness is that not all parts of the plan have been implemented yet either, because there are things around stock water, and then there is also about the and forgive me if I get this wrong because I don't know the plan so well that I know every little aspect of it, but I think there's something about total limits on, I can't remember if it's the groundwater or the surface water, but overall maximum amount, not maximum take, but the maximum volume in a season and things like that. I might be wrong on that, but what I'm really getting at is that not all parts of the plan were covered in the consent review, because the consent review was about the surface water takes, but it was deemed that was the biggest impact, and that's why it was undertaken. So look, really the point I was just trying to make before was that to do a review, a full review of the plan effectiveness is a big job, and it's not something that you do in a month or something like that. It's probably a good year, if not more, of work. It's not in our work program at the moment. That's not to say it can't be, but it's not in our work program at the moment, and we'd have to prioritise it against other things. That is then what would be put in place to then say, does the plan need a review overall? So I'll leave it there and happy to answer questions.
Thank you, Tim. Have we got some questions for Tim? Chris, are you starting? You don't have to.
Tim, you're right. It will be a big amount of work to come up with some sort of review. But there's some discussions that happened a long time ago, and I believe it was probably formed the original ZIP, of which, for the Zone Committee, which I can't find, because it all seems to be amended somewhere. But there was talk about transferring, or allowing Green Street Irrigation to transfer to the South Branch and take that volume of water. It was always set aside that they would be able to transfer that water. I look at what's going on Green Street Creek and thinking, how have we got to the situation where the water has got to come out of the South Branch to go and maintain a minimum flow in another creek when they're actually wanting, or we need to use the water from the South Branch, but the consenting process seems to have sidetracked what the original intent was. Now, there's Green Street people here, I know that, but we seem to have got away from the good that was happening in the environment by having such a rigid plan that all the good stuff that was going on seems to be sort of like swept aside. We've now, and going through the consenting process, economics just got completely lost in the whole process. Consents have been pretty much degraded to negligible. They're actually worthless because there's been virtually no water available for a significant part of the year. But you go through this consenting process, but where does economics stack up? Or is it only about the plan that's always that you guys have been able to look at? Or
It comes in twice, but it's primarily in the plan development is when the economic analysis is considered as part of that. So during the development of the plan, there is an impact assessment done on the impact of the changes that are being proposed. In the consent review is when there is consideration of whether, and again, I'm not a planner, so I just have to be a little bit careful here, but I'll tell you what I interpret it as, and it might be slightly wrong, I'm not sure, but there is an inability to degrade the consent to the point at which it's no longer usable, or which is really saying that you could no longer farm in that case for the irrigation. That is considered, but it's a pretty high threshold in the sense of it's not just you are worse off, it's that you can't exercise your consent. So that's at the time of the consent review, but the main economic consideration is during the time of the plan development.
yeah, so the thing it's really exercising my mind at the moment. We've got this plan, and 6 QMEX, whether we're supportive of it, was probably okay if it was going to keep the river mouth open. We knew there was never water flowing in the North Branch. It still hasn't. It's nothing's different about it. But we've got a 10 QMEC number sitting in the plan as well for a few years' time. And it says there's no water will be allocated other than the renewal of consents until 10 QMEX is met. Is that something that we should be absolutely scared shitless about? Because we don't know what it actually means. Or does it mean 10 QMEX and that's the new minimum flow that all consents will be applied to? I know it's probably more of a planning question, but there's something that it's written in the plan. Is doing a review now the best time to look at that, because actually it derogates all consents to being useless?
It is written in the plan, so under the planning rules that would be applied, is it 2030? I'm just trying to remember. I can't actually. 2033, yeah. So in 9 years' time, any new consent would have to line up with that 10 QMEC minimum flow. So that's not saying that the same thing would happen and there'd be a consent review. A consent review is a decision made around that, but after 2033, as the plan stands now, any new consent would require a minimum flow of 10 QMEX. So I guess the question is a review, what you asked is a review, if that's not right, I'll just say right, for whatever reason, is there a need to do a review immediately, or have we still got some time? And the reason I say time is that because under our planning work that we've got over the next 5 to 10 years, there is an integrated plan being developed for the region, but that includes things like minimum flows. So that would be a consideration as part of that. So at the moment, we have the sub-regionals, which are chapters of the regional plan. That regional plan is being reviewed, and the intention is that is notified in 2028. So that's before 2033. So there is time for that to be looked at again. I mean, I suppose I'm being slightly careful with my words there, but that's, I guess my advice, as I see it, would be that in terms of that 10 QMEC, that there are mechanisms in place now that could be reviewed as part of an overall plan that wouldn't require a special Ashburton review. That's not to say there aren't other things that could be done as well. Does that answer?
Yeah, and really it's around that question of the derogation of existing rights, because I think some people would argue that they've effectively lost the right to irrigate now. There's a handful of them, a couple of them are on the run. And if you go to that 10 QMAX, of course, then you are going to not only confirm that derogation, but you're also going to create derogation for a whole wider range of people. Is that still reviewable? Is that an excuse to review the plan?
Can you just talk with the microphone, because I can't hear.
Sorry. So my question really for Tim is a reflection on, I mean, when I read your paper, Tim, and I look at what's happened over the last 2 years since the plan's been operative, it would appear to me that the effects of derogation, amongst other effects, have been worse than perhaps was predicted when I read all this about if you close down the stock water races and you allow Green Street to take their water out of the South Branch, and there's a few other actions, and you'd meet the 6 QMAX and then you should be able to meet the 10 QMAX. But it looks like by meeting the 6 QMAX, there's a whole lot of derogation going on already. So going to a 10 QMAX minimum flow is going to create even worse problems. So is that enough justification for a review of the plan? And I accept that 2033 looks like it's the operative date by which you might need to do that.
Again, not as a planning expert, I don't want to give a definitive answer on that, but I think the simple answer is yes, it does, in the sense that there's no doubt that moving to 6 has had an impact, and moving to 10 is going to have a much greater. And I think it would be reasonable to say that needs looking at again in terms of the overall outcomes. And I would expect that to be looked at in the same way that under a planning regime, any of the minimum flows around the place would be looked at again to say, is it achieving what is set out to do, and what's the impact upon that? So, I mean, the point you're making is a very good one, that to move to 10, I mean, I read the documents as well and was slightly surprised at the ease at which it is suggested that could be achieved, because I think it's a substantial rise again.
I'm not an expert especially on the tributaries of the river. I'm not an expert on anything, but I'm not an expert on the tributaries of the river. But certainly, you in your paper you reflect that the expectation was if you increase the minimum flows in the tributaries, that would solve some of the problems. But those tributaries that flow into the North Branch, when the North Branch is dry, is clearly not having any benefit to the minimum flows of the river, of the combined river at State Highway 1.
Yeah, there's a couple of things I'd say on that. One is that the river, if you take O'Shea's and you take Snowdon Creek in particular, Snowdon, that water is essentially North Branch water. It's shallow groundwater that's popping up and then it's coming back in further down. Under this summer, yep, it's dried up. Under a kind of a normal summer, we would expect to see the North Branch flowing more than it has, under the current. But it's essentially, I guess what I'm saying is that there are values in Snowdon Creek and in O'Shea's that are separate from the North Branch. It's not just about having more in the tributaries to make the North Branch flow more. It's also about the values in those streams and to keep those going. So.
O'Shea's is a lovely creek, yeah.
We've got a question online from Sydney. Have you got a question?
Oh, hello, hello, Tim. This is Sydney. I think the question has been answered. It was about number 20 on the memo about the 6 liters per second going up to the 14,000 liters per second. My question was around the difference between the A permits to the B permits, but I think if I understood correct, Tim, is that A permits are the current ones and B would be new ones. Is that how should I understand that?
No, I believe there are currently B permits. So this is a way of, if I went back to the basics of water allocation, and I always contrast Canterbury versus Waikato in the way that water is allocated. Waikato tends to, it's not altogether, they tend to have a very low minimum flow, but they allocate a tiny amount of water so that you get really high reliability for your water, but there's not a lot available. That's one way of allocating. The other way is that you have more water available and you have a higher minimum flow. And that's the way that Canterbury tends to operate. So that there's more water allocated in a river, a higher minimum flow to try and maintain the values. Now, an A and a B block kind of takes that to the next extreme, which is to say there are some people who got in first and they will have good reliability. Well, I shouldn't say good. They will have better reliability. So they will have a lower minimum flow, and that's the A block. There are other people who have come in later, and some of them are already allocated in there, who get a higher minimum flow, so worse reliability, but they have access to some water because there is a volume there that's allocated. Now those ones, because they're on a high minimum flow, they will always need storage and some other way of keeping it so that they can use the water. But so the A and the B block already exists. It's not just about into the future, but anything new that was, and I'm pretty sure it's all fully allocated anyway, but in that situation, anything new would be in the B block. So that's worse reliability, but it is water available.
That's really good. Thank you. That's very informative.
Should I hit? Have you got a question?
Yeah, Tim, going through some of this original material that was presented to the Zone Committee, this is way back, predates when they almost just started. One of them says, things that it said was, if you're going to increase the minimum flows, there's a whole series of things you need to do. One of them in the North Branch, you need to get rid of the gravel because the gravel bed is actually building up, so the water's unlikely to flow down it anyway. But these are reports that came from ECAN, but they just completely disregarded it. They just went along and picked the eyes out of, we're just going to go for the minimum flow, but actually, if it's going to take a generation to sort out the rest of the stuff, which is lower the riverbeds, get rid of the gravel, these real hard problems, but they went for the easy option, which just increase the minimum flow on a bed that's virtually always going to be dry. Like 90% of the time that's dry in the last 10 years, I'd say. But yeah, is it possible to go back and have a look at some of that information and that was presented? And some of the modelling was absolutely shocking. We've got much better information with telemetry now that you actually know what the consumptive take is or potentially can be taken.
Yeah, and look, the example that I gave of Snowdon's, I think, is a good example, Snowdon Creek, of one of the reasons that there is this movement of water out of the North Branch is because it is elevated, because we've put stop banks on it and the gravel's built up and it moves out onto the small creeks on either side. So, look, it's there as an issue. It all comes down in the end to who wants to pay for that, because taking the gravel out is not a cheap exercise, and what we find is that the idea that there is an industry out there keen to have gravel, yes, but only when it's within about 20 kilometres of where they're building. So therefore, if that's going to be a viable solution, we've got to work out how we're going to actually pay for that. But I mean, in terms of the physics of what you're talking about, it's still true. It's. But
The point
I suppose, sorry, the only other thing I would say is that if you're thinking of the tribute, like these small tributaries and the river itself as all part of the same system, then it kind of balances it out a little bit as well.
It was more from the fact there's a minimum flow there, and it can never be, or virtually never be met in an irrigation season. So yeah, what's the relevance of that in the meantime till we actually sort out the other issues there? That was probably where I was coming from.
But yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. I know what you mean.
Okay, just a couple of points I'd like to make. When the zone, in your reply to us, Tim, you mentioned the zone committee quite a bit, that the zone committee being consulted and the zone committee agreed to everything. If I recall my memory of it, the zone committee was part of it, but it was, the idea with the zone committee was gave broad support to this happening, and said that it had to be managed carefully so we didn't have any undue circumstances that we didn't expect. And when you look at the summary of your reply, on one of the points in the background was water can continue to be used for farming, and there's definitely been some of the community that have lost that opportunity, which was never an aspiration of the zone committee for some people to suffer, because we want everyone to be treated equally. If I go back, probably a wee bit what Chris was saying, if we go back to a report that came in 2011 when we were looking at this, when the process started, and if I just read a bit out of it, it says that Graham Horrell's model, which was used to do this, had a number of assumptions. You may recall that Graham's model predicted that the reduction of stock water would compensate for the increase in minimum flow, and therefore the impact on reliability for existing consent holders would be minor or less than minor. These reductions in stock water, if they were real, have not resulted in a significant improvement in the Ashburn River flow measured at State Highway 1. When the model was rerun by Patrick Dooney, he had the access to better real data, and as a consequence, his conclusion referred to a 5% average drop in reliability, but within a range of up to 20. The models underpin the plan change. However, the plan has not changed, and the point is that the plan was sold to us on a 5% reliability. In fact, it's more like 20, and if you talk to other farmers, their reliability is zero. They've lost their water completely. So, to talk 10 litres, and you said that we've got a chance in 2028 to look at this, but there have been some things that were modelled that have proved to be incorrect from that model, and I think that's why we need to discuss this, and there should be some opportunities to how we can rectify some of those inadequacies. And there are ways of doing that. And I'm not going to put you on the spot, but I mean, Jennifer's going to present her paper on what's happening so far on the with Green Street and everything. And we have got a few ideas and that we can bring up at this meeting about ways that we could probably do something with the water there. But I suppose the question is, did you accept that the modelling probably has deviated a bit from what was with the two models, from what we thought was a 5% reduction on reliability to be way over that, and the proof has proved to be the case?
I don't know enough detail to be able to answer in terms of that 5% or things. I think there's no doubt, though, that the modelling that Graham Horrell did early on has been, we've got much better data now, and that there are better ways of looking at these issues. So, but yeah, I don't know enough detail on it to be able to comment on what that 5 to 20 or something like that.
Well, I think the suggestion being there are better ways to do it, and I think we obviously want to get the water in the Ashburton River, which was the whole prime thing, but we've got to make it so that it works for everyone. And I think if the modelling was proved to be incorrect and there's better modelling down and better science, maybe we should be looking at that in the near future rather than later in the future. I'm just thinking if there's no more particular questions for Tim, we might get Jennifer to talk about where she's at with the Green Street report, and Tim could stay there as well. And then because I've also got, we've got Brent Painter online, because we have got, an opportunity to look at a different way of targeting stream augmentation, which might help, and I'd be interested to see what you thought of that opportunity, if that's right.
Fine by me, and Brett was in touch with me this
great.
morning, so I have seen some of that.
Excellent. So Jennifer, welcome here. Is this your first time to present to Zone Committee?
No, but probably in this decade.
Oh, that's great. Well, so we look forward to you, and then we'll just have a few questions, and we might just bring in some other people just for a bit of a conflab about where we're at and how it's going, if that's all right.
Absolutely.
Okay.
I'll just do a real brief update, and it was good to hear from Daryl as well in the beginning of the meeting. So kia ora koutou, I'm Jennifer Rochford. I'm the zone manager at Environment Canterbury. And I attended the last meeting, so I got to hear Linda Bray read out Roger's words around Green Street. And just as a reminder, during the last meeting, that's right when we had made the decision, right before that last meeting is when we had made the decision to allow the diversion of water into Green Street. And Tim talked about how Environment Canterbury didn't get that transition, from the previous low flows to the new regime now and the new resource consents, and you've been talking about some of that right now. And specifically, we didn't provide enough support for the community in adjusting to all those impacts that those new flows would have. And so the purpose of, and one thing we also discussed was having Sarah Heddle go out. So she's an ECAN staff member, so she would go out and engage with the community and really just start to, begin a better understanding of some of those impacts and get more input from the community. Sarah is overseas right now, and so she wasn't able to be here today, and she apologizes for that. So the purpose of my briefing is just to give an update of what have we done over the last month since that last zone committee meeting, but also kind of to try and start talking about what is the future, how are we going to plan for this type of scenario when it happens, hopefully next year. Hopefully we're not having to deal with this this year. We start getting some more regular rain. So just, I'll start with what Sarah came back with from her time working or out in the Green Street community. So she spent time walking the creek. Some of this is her words, that's why I'm reading it. Walking the creek and talking to some of the community members. And again, sorry she can't be here today. She wanted to thank those of the Green Street community, especially the chair, Daryl Buttrick, for giving up so much of their time on 2 separate occasions to show her around the creek and the surrounding area. Her notes on her time on the creek mimic a lot of what Roger presented to you at the last meeting. She said Green Street is not like, and this is the creek itself, is not like a stockwater race or an artificial drain running across a paddock with no habitat or amenity values. The creek flows through a number of properties with landowners proudly showing her the creek. She saw stretches of mature native plants, especially in the lower reaches, and springs located along the creek. Some parts holding water and flow for stretches even when there was little to no water flowing at the top end. On the day she was there, the water flow was not reaching the very bottom stretch of the creek as there wasn't enough water on that day. So what I've been doing, that's what Sarah had done, her engagement there, 2 visits into the Green Street community. That's just an overview of what she saw. And then since then, I've been working with Daryl on the emergency provisions. So that's what was put in place to allow the base flow into Green Street Creek, that decision that we made prior to the last meeting. So those emergency provisions were to allow some ecological flow to get into the creek. And it also gives us some time to have a conversation with the community about how are we going to manage during these periods in the future, noting that we we weren't engaging with the community enough prior to going on restriction. So since the 21st of March, when the decision was made to allow the diversion of water, we saw flow coming into the pond. It was getting lower and lower. As you know, prior to the rain, it was very, very dry. I started to get concerned. I started bugging Daryl a lot. It became, in my opinion, quite difficult to provide a sustaining flow to both creeks. At the lowest point, the flow in O'Shea got down to 41 liters per second. It averaged more about 50. Part of the reason for that was due to the flow being lost to ground due to leaky irrigation race. So it has to go through the irrigation race and then it gets into Green Street Creek. And as it travels along that, a lot of water is lost to ground. We came very close to requesting the diversion to be turned off prior to provide that priority to O'Shea Creek, just as the plan requires and the resource consents require, but luckily rain came in that big storm. And so since then, Daryl and I have been engaging a lot and watching the river flows and ensuring that priority is being given to O'Shea Creek. But it is currently still continuing to drop, and so again, we're hoping for more rain to come. I looked at it this morning. There's about 200 liters per second going into O'Shea Creek, noting that our data has a time delay. We don't get it. It's not immediate. Anyway, 200 liters per second going into O'Shea, and about 220 going into the irrigation race, and about 100 of that was making it into Green Street Creek. That's quite a good flow. But water levels are continuing to drop, again, hoping for rain, and I think we're going to make it. And then just a note that last week, I think that was last week, I came down to Ashburton and caught up with the chair of the zone committee, so Bill Thomas, and with Daryl. And if you may, I just want to reflect on your traffic light. Bill opened the meeting with an analogy to a traffic light system that when we're in green, the restrictions are off, irrigation can occur according to consent conditions, and the creeks are running really well. So everyone's really happy. It's all working really well. But then when we're in amber, we can see that the restrictions are coming. And that's the point where we need to understand what are we going to do. So in the last scenario, the restrictions went in place and phone calls were made to Environment Canterbury. So it's kind of, after the fact. It's more in that amber period, as Bill put it, where we really need to understand how is Environment Canterbury and the Green Street community working to determine how we manage those situations. And I feel that we're managing the here and now really well, meaning that we have the emergency provisions in place. We're doing that really well so that we can stop having the day-to-day conversation about what are the water levels now, are we worried, what are we going to do, and we're actually trying to get to the point where we can have more of a longer-term conversation with the community. Both Bill and Daryl suggested a meeting with the Green Street community, which Environment Canterbury would very much welcome. And to me, that is somewhat in line with what Daryl had spoke about at the beginning of this meeting, that really wanting to have that open conversation. I mean, we may not be on the same page at the moment about what we think needs to happen. It's unsure, but I think we're all of us in agreement that a discussion needs to happen so that when we get in this situation again, we're well planned and we know what to do, so that we're not, having to manage the situation like this again next year. That's all from me. Thank you, Bill. Or Chair, sorry.
Thanks, Jennifer. Is there any questions for Jen at this stage? So, what we're trying to do now is trying to see what we can do to try and keep the flows that you want and that ECAN require in those creeks and river, but try and get some water to the other areas, or enough water that farmers can possibly do a bit of irrigating, or the creeks will start to the levels that you want. And there's not a lot of options because it's a bit far away from the big stream. It's quite costly, and as you know, the Green Street is sort of stuck between the south and the north, and in a difficult spot. And you know, as I say, if we review this a bit, we probably look at it a bit different. But I had the opportunity to talk to Dr. Brent Painter recently about targeted stream augmentation, which has been used on the MAR projects and other ones. And Brent, I don't want to put words in his mouth, so I might just get Brent, if he's available, just to run through an option that you think there's a possibility that could work in this scenario. Brent, if you're happy to do that, please.
Bill, could I just jump
Sure
in
thing.
quickly before Brett, just to give some context?
Sorry, Brett, it's Ange.
Sorry, Brett. I just want for everyone that's here today, and just to give an update. So the salvage report that was undertaken on the 12th of March was a 200-metre stretch of a 10-kilometre waterway. So in that small, very small stretch, there were 50 brown trout, and it was noted that it's a brown trout spawning site. 8 inanga, they were quite surprised to find them that far away from the beach. There was over 200 upland bully, 8 eels and 1 freshwater cray in that particular stretch. So what we're talking about here isn't insignificant from an ecological perspective. So I just think when Brett starts talking about some TSA and other things, I think we keep that in mind just for some context.
Okay, Brett, thanks.
Thank you. Thanks, Bill. Thanks, Ange. So for those of you whom I haven't met, I work with Heke Homes Water Enhancement Trust on environmental infrastructure projects. Prior to that, I was developing these concepts region-wide in support of the Canterbury Water Management Strategy. So I was called into this yesterday, so I was not familiar with the Green Street situation until I started researching yesterday morning. And I really appreciate all the conversations I had yesterday and also some more this morning to clarify what our options might be. And so if I can just talk through those, perhaps top to bottom, and then we can have a discussion about it. The environmental infrastructure concept that I was looking at for Green Street involves piggybacking onto existing water distribution and storage infrastructure. As noted, that we're a long way from anything else. Plus also existing water take consents, and where you're in an over-allocated or nearly fully allocated catchment, this is important. And in this case, we're talking about non-stream depleting consents, because otherwise you are just recirculating within the same system. And by that I mean deep groundwater. So the aim is to provide environmental flows, as we know, for maintaining aquatic life during the dry period. So this was specifically for Green Street Creek, but also keeping in mind the other waterways around O'Shea, etc. Where the potential supply of water is not enough to keep the target reach flowing during dry periods, and we've just heard the reasons for that. It's the high losses to groundwater in the unlined races. Then we may need a lined irrigation pond or private pond or wetland for salvaging fish into. Piggybacking off the existing infrastructure involves agreements with the owners on complementary or subservient use of that infrastructure. Piggybacking off existing consents involves what are called shadow or subservient, sometimes called mirror consents, that allow water unrequired by the parent consent to be used for a different purpose. So this is not opening up the parent consent and existing consent and trying to add a use, as we saw in Awa, or change the use, This is a new consent which sits underneath the parent consent. There are active examples of such concepts in both Selwyn and Hinds Plains for Canterbury, and they're supported by specific environmental augmentation rules in the Land and Water Regional Plan. There are not such specific rules across the rest of Canterbury, or region-wide rules at this point in time. And so the suggestions, the ideas that I'm about to put forward assume that a consenting pathway can be agreed with Environment Canterbury for this type of augmentation in the Ashburton River catchment. And I have received some advice from a consent planner on potential rule pathways that this could be done. So, as noted in yesterday, I reviewed consents up and down the Green Street area, and with the help of Canterbury Maps, I had a look at infrastructure. I had a look at Green Street Creek, didn't get to walk it, like Sarah did, unfortunately, maybe soon. And I also really appreciated a conversation with Daryl Butterick yesterday, and later on Ben Shearer, who is currently overseas but returned my call. So firstly, we've identified a potential option for the lower 4 to 5 kilometres of Green Street Creek. This involves a shadow consent to Green Street Irrigation's global deep groundwater consent, a shadow discharge consent in and out of an irrigation pond, plus use of existing infrastructure. Ben, as representative of the pond and pump infrastructure owners, has provided preliminary, if you like, support for the concept. In fact, this, I understand, had been previously discussed, something like this amongst the members. The costs would include consenting, compliance, a flow meter, if one can't be moved from another part of the scheme, pump wear and tear, and pumping costs. The previous environmental infrastructure concepts in Canterbury that I've been involved with have been funded by a combination of grant fundings, such as solar panel array as a contribution to pumping costs, as has happened with Eiffleton Community Irrigation Scheme, and also by targeted rate funding. Some of the concepts were also previously funded through the general rate. So that's the first one. Shall I carry on and talk about the rest of it, or do you want to pause there?
I think we'll just carry on, Brett, please.
Carry on. Okie doke. So that's the lower sort of half of Green Street Creek. The upper 4 to 5 Ks is more challenging to keep flowing during a dry period. And this is due to the existing infrastructure. There is, I understand, only one irrigation pond and a 70 litre per second pump up the irrigation system between the offtake from O'Shea and Green Street Creek. I understand that the required flow is about 250 litres a second to ensure flow continuity down to the lower augmentation pond that we've identified. This is during a dry period. So the concept here is that shadow or potentially subservient consents to the current Green Street irrigation take use and discharge consents from the South Ashburton River via O'Shea Creek. We believe these could assist if the consent allowed for the taken environmental enhanced water, so this is under a new shadow consent with a different use, to be distributed to Green Street Creek. And as I've heard noted today, the current irrigation take consent requires the consent holder to first augment O'Shea Creek up to the minimum flow before any water can be diverted to Green Street. And my understanding is in a dry period, there is not enough water able to be taken to deliver both water down Green Street Creek and to achieve O'Shea Creek minimum flows as they stand. So that's the second option, and it could be a combination of some pumping in there as well, but not by itself. Now I've not considered completely new options such as sinking new deep groundwater bores and other such things like that at this period of time, because that's significantly more expensive. The third thing that has been noted multiple times in my conversations over the last day relates to targeted effectiveness reviews in regard to the current rules, and noting, Tim, what you had to say before in regard to effectiveness review for a whole plan being very complex. And so my understanding of the conversations here are, I think you might have referred to consequences of the plan, and a number of consequences have emerged recently, and as well as Green Street Creek, there's potential consequences, or there are consequences, it seems, on Lake Hood as well. And so with the period of time and the wet years we've had and the dry years we've had since the plan, there has been support in the conversations I've had over the last day for some targeted effectiveness reviews. So perhaps if I stop there, apologies if that's a dive into detail, but options or concepts do require a little bit of detail.
Thanks, Brett. I don't know, Tim or Jennifer, have you got any comments whether this is a possibility that could be pursued, or haven't heard enough, or?
I think given that we just heard this information, this is something that is exactly what we're wanting to, why we're needing a conversation with the community. I don't think we could comment one way or the other. Brett has a lot of experience with this. You know, he's done this in those two sites in Selwyn and Hines. It's just, I don't know that we're prepared to make a comment around whether, you know, it's viable or not. I think there's a lot of detail to consider, but we're not putting anything off the table. I don't even know if the, you know, at a bare minimum, what does the plan allow? But it sounds like Brett's already done some considerations around that as well.
Yeah, I guess, and thanks, Brett, for that. I was thinking about the targeted effectiveness review, and I'm just, again, I'm not a planner, so I can't say too much about that, but my understanding is it's pretty hard to do a targeted review, because essentially you open the whole plan up, and you can't, you know, just to target in on one specific place is difficult. I don't know if it's impossible, but it is difficult, because you do open the whole plan up for looking at, and then that becomes a much bigger thing. So I guess what I'm really saying is, I think if there are ways of doing this, like Brett was suggesting, with subservient consents or something within the current plan structure, that is always going to be simpler. It doesn't mean it's simple, but it's simpler to do, because it fits, you know, it potentially fits within the rule framework that's there now, and doesn't require, you know, a large scale plan change. So yeah, that's probably my only comment on that.
Yeah, thanks Jen for some of those comments, and thanks Brent for the opportunity to look at other ways of engineered solutions. But one of the things I come back to is we keep on talking about litres per second. When actually we're talking about ecological thing, isn't it about the depth of the water and actually being slightly more nuanced in what we're looking at? Rather than saying we're getting 50 litres or 200 litres a second flowing down a creek, isn't it more about if it's 20 litres a second but it's at a depth of what the species need to live in? And why can't the community or someone apply for a consent for an environmental flow in times like that to send it down to do another environmental job, where at the moment O'Shea's Creek seems to be the target, and it's got to have 500 litres a second for some reason, when actually there's another creek down there that could use it somehow as well. It's where you've come up with a solution that we've got these emergency powers, but surely there's something more enduring you can do that in a consenting process that allows you to do an environmental restoration or something as a fallback. Is that right off the agenda, or rather looking at the engineering solution for everything?
I mean, actually, a lot of what Brett talked about is a consenting, it's to do with kind of using consents in a slightly different way. So it's not a completely engineering solution. I think, look, it's always there, but the fundamental thing that we fall back on is that under the current plan structure, you can't issue a consent that goes against the minimum flows, and therefore part of the thing we're in here is that the diversion from the south branch into O'Shea, which feeds through into the irrigation scheme and through into Green Street Creek, if it's diverted that way, is still dependent on that 6 QMAC. And that's being shut off, so that because of the irrigation restrictions, and therefore under the consenting that sits under the plan, you can't have another minimum flow if that says because it's doing Green Street Creek, it's at 3 or something like that. That's not permissible under the plan, regardless of the use that it is. So that's why I think what Brett's suggesting is some other ways of thinking within the current rule framework. Otherwise, you require a plan change. That's how I interpreted what Brett was saying. But I haven't had a lot of time to think about it.
I appreciate you put on the spot a bit, because this is really just like new information to all of us, but as we try and find solutions, let's go. So if you don't mind, I might ask Daryl if you might like to make a comment whether you think something like this is runnable, if it's worth carrying on down this road a bit, or you think it's not practical.
Supplementing augmentation it's quite simple and practical. Like the pond job midway down would be a go. To divert water from O'Shea's Creek, because what seems to be lost in translation along the way is that the old minimum flow in O'Shea's Creek for the last 50 years has been 50 litres a second, and that's worked perfectly fine. The ecological values have obviously been preserved. Somehow it's been cranked up to 450 litres a second, and as an example, that rain we got the other day that put the Ashburton River at about 22 QMEX meant we could take water from the Ashburton River, but O'Shea's Creek itself was only flowing at 250 litres a second, which meant we would have to take 200 litres a second out of the Ashburton River to top O'Shea's Creek up to go out into a river that was dry, before we could take any water for augmenting Green Street Creek or irrigation. And as it was, we could only get about 500 odd litres a second out of the Ashburton River, out of the South Ashburton, which meant by the time we diverted 200 of that into O'Shea's Creek, it left us with 300, which meant we could put it in the Green Street Creek, but wouldn't be enough left to irrigate with. So we made the decision not to irrigate, not take the flow out of the river, because then we could take the couple hundred litres a second out of O'Shea's Creek and put in the Green Street Creek. Was ECAN were adamant that for us to take water out of the South Ashburton, there had to be 450 litres going down O'Shea's Creek, which means we would have to supplement it.
Do you recall when the plan change was happening in this review process, there was an opportunity in that process when they set the level at 450 for a counter-argument to be presented to the Commissioner or whoever was doing the review process to argue the case that 450 was too high? Did you guys take that opportunity? Do you know?
Oh, absolutely we did. Because we were saying that extra 400 litres a second, the difference between the 50 and the 450, meant that we would have to take that 400 litres out of the South Ashburton to ensure O'Shea's flowed at 450, which further depleted the South Ashburton that was water on water, and meant that 450 litres was going out of Shays Creek into the North Branch that's traditionally dry in the summer, and this year's a classic. It's been dry since November. And that fresh the other day when the Ashburton was flowing at 22 or 27 cumecs, there wasn't a drop of water at Digby's Bridge.
And this was pointed out in your application, was it?
Yeah, basically in our application and our hearing, I stated that the Green Street Creek would go dry if they stuck to their guns. There'd be shallow wells further down that would go dry and other springs, that our reliability would be shot to pieces and the North Branch would never flow. And the South Branch wasn't going to be at 6 cumecs all summer anyway. And that was completely disregarded. And within 6 months, everything of it has happened. And basically nothing good environmentally, economically, socially, or any other way has happened.
Okay, thanks, Daryl.
Thank
Brett,
you.
is there anything else you'd like to bring up or discuss at this stage?
I guess just noting that in terms of an engineering solution, Chris, if my understanding is if the Green Street irrigation intake from the South Branch Ashburton had not gone into O'Shea's but had been in a parallel race, for example, by O'Shea's, then it wouldn't be subject to the minimum flow, and it would be like other consents where the water race, if you like, is a conduit for the water. So there are other more expensive options of doing this, but I haven't considered those yet. I guess the only other thing in terms of a way forward is just noting again that even consenting processes and are not without significant cost at times, and ongoing costs in terms of pumping during a dry period are also not insignificant at times, and so this is not a cheap or quick or easy fix, but it's important that collectively we can get something up and running sooner rather than later.
Is it possible to do like a trial for a couple of years or something like that, where the regional council gets the resource consent and the community get together and see what they can operate and how they can do it, and then over a period of time that might be handed to a more permanent consent for what's needed? Because we've got to look at different solutions, and if rather than going and burying everything into a good idea but it's not quite meeting the mark, but you've tied up a lot of money in consenting before you've met something, where does the regional council sit in the process? Is it something that they can pick up and try and run with, or?
We're no different from anyone else in that if we hold a consent, it has to be, and we do, quite often hold consents for different things, and parts of ECAN apply to get a consent from ECAN. So it can certainly happen, but we are still bound by minimum flows and things set out in the plan. There is nothing magical about the regional council holding that means that it can essentially bypass, except under emergency powers.
Yeah, and I wasn't talking about bypassing the process. I'm talking about the regional council owning the consent on behalf of the community, so that the community can get on and do the stuff. You look after the paperwork side of it.
Yeah, look, that can happen. I'm not saying it's simple, but it can happen. Yep.
The other mechanism, Chris, for trialling, which has been used in Hikio Hines, is through compliance discretion for trial purposes. And so we've, over the years in Hikio Hines, we have utilised compliance discretion to trial things. So I thought that was also the first part of your question, and so that could be something that could be considered in Green Street based on what has happened in the Hines.
You're articulating it much.
More better.
Brett, you're articulating what I was trying to say much better, much more eloquent. Thank you.
Well, so I appreciate everyone's time, and to move this forward, I just wonder if the committee, what their views are, because I'm thinking, do we, as we just, a subcommittee of ADC and ECAN, and our role is to sort of put ideas in front of ECAN if we get feedback from the community, do you think we should, as a zone committee, write a letter to planning or Jennifer or someone within ECAN and say that we've had this proposal and we suggest that it's worth looking at doing a bit more work on it? What's the feeling we should do?
Investigate it further.
Oh, Jen?
I just want to, I feel that we're starting to move ahead quite quickly to more of an engineering solution. We're in a very dry year. I don't even know if this would be required in a normal year. My assumption about what we would be doing, what we would be engaging with the community about was when we're getting into that amber period where we can see that the restrictions are coming, how do we prepare for the river to go dry? There are lots of ponds. There are lots of areas where fish can survive while we're going through a dry period. So there's other options than going into I'm not saying that we can't have this conversation. This is really a decision for the community because the cost will be borne there. I just don't want us to move beyond that. This is an incredibly dry year, and possibly this engineering solution isn't required if we were in normal circumstances. And so I just want to make sure we're not jumping to solutions that might not be needed.
I think the trick here is not to get into amber and definitely not get into red. So how do we not get into amber? And then we've got to look at alternatives. And so this is an alternative which can be investigated, and it might not be a runner, but we just need a bit of work, because I think it goes hand in hand, because we've got Lake Hood, who Tim's just been down to see with Councillor Mackenzie, and they've got an issue too. There's a lot of communities associated with the Ashburton River, and these Green Street and everything are at the top or the middle of it, and so we've got consequences at the top, the middle and the bottom. So we've got it's not just going to fix itself, and just by getting to amber and saving a few fish won't be the answer. What we try to do is stop it getting into amber, and that's what we're trying to do.
And is that for ecological purposes or for enabling irrigation?
And for recreational, down at Lake Hood, they've got the whole community there where they have, we just heard today, there's over 200,000 car trips that go over that last bridge around Lake Hood, so it's a whole community, so it's a community thing. It's not just about irrigation, it's the whole infrastructure. Ange, have you got a question?
Yeah, just quickly, just to go back to Daryl's point about the overlooked aspect of the O'Shea's Creek going from 50 litres per second to 450. Back on the 2nd of April, Jamie circulated that report. I think it was a Mark Taylor, who's an ecological consultant, that supported the fact that, well, I don't actually know because I haven't read the book entirely, but from that 50 litres to that 450 interests me. I'm just looking for some more context around that. Brett's mentioned targeted efficiency review. Is that it's not an engineering solution, but from my perspective, it feels like we're picking favourites, and we've picked O'Shea's Creek at the detriment of Green Street Creek, and that's the part I'm struggling with. What was the logic behind that?
So, look, I'm not over all of the detail of it, but I do know that that was debated as part of both the plan hearing and the consent review around Green Street irrigation. So, Mark Taylor's report was presented to the commissioners, the hearing commissioners on that. There was other evidence presented. The 450 comes from an estimation of what the mean annual low flow naturally is in that system, and the commissioners, considering all the evidence, came to the view that the 450 was the minimum flow. So that ecological assessment, which comes partly to the question that you had earlier, Chris, about litres a second, but that is part of all of the evidence. is, okay, given a flow of X, what does that mean for the environment? And that's the type of assessment that Mark Taylor did, and there's other work that's been done in that space as well.
Thanks, Tim. Just a point of clarification, when we do these assessments, there's desktop assessments and then there's on-the-ground assessments. And I think I just look at the work that's been down in the lowlands when, like of Mark Webb hopped in the drains. I just want to make sure that these assessments are being done in a practical, on-the-ground, really understanding what the environment looks like, because I struggle to compare the two. The modelling, all of that comes into question when we've got environmental outcomes that we're hoping to achieve. It's just an observation.
In the progress of moving things forward, I'm going to have to leave the meeting soon, but I'm very supportive of further work to investigate what the opportunities are. I don't know what the rest of the zone committee or how they want to go, but I'm supportive of that, but I'm going to have to leave the meeting. I've got another meeting to chair in half an hour. Get home.
Well, I think, Jen, just getting back to your point a bit, there's a whole number of raft of issues with this whole Ashburton consent review. Some things are working well, some aren't. So it's really just an opportunity to look at the whole, not just the Green Street, not just the irrigators, not just Lake Hood, not just the recreational users, just everyone. So it's a joint thing. So Claire or Artie, are you happy that we might write a letter to ECAN and outline Brent's proposal and opportunities, and then ECAN can look at it? It might not be a runner, but at least we'll give it a shot, if it is or not. Are you happy with that? So, Chris has left the meeting, so I'll move that we write a letter to ECAN outlining some of the discussions we had today and recommending that they have a look at it and just see if it's a possibility and time frames, everything in consideration. You know, it's not something that's going to happen tomorrow, but just a work stream to carry on with. I second for that. And all in favour? Aye, carried. Tim and Jen, just before you go, I appreciate you coming in down to talk to us, and it's much easier when you're here. We can have a frank discussion. Have you got any closing comments you'd like to make?
Thanks for the opportunity. Yeah. And look, I think that what Jen and Brett and others are talking about is trying to move forward on, what are some solutions, and that's the important thing.
That's good. Thank you.
Yeah, no comment from me. Thank you very much, and look forward to continuing the conversation.
Right. And Brett, I thank you for your time and effort you put in at very short notice. Thank you.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Okay, well, that's dealt to that half of the meeting. So the next thing, I think we're into our funding round. So Dave, would you like to, you can do some talking now.
Yeah, hopefully this is working this time. Yep, push the right button. So we're now coming to the funding. Now, at the moment, we've got left about, exactly $30,615.03, excluding GST. I don't know how that worked out, but so that's what's left to be recommended. We need to make the recommendations this month in order to get the funding out to the recipients before the end of the financial year. There are 4 applications currently for the Zone Committee to review, and what we're going to do is we've got an opportunity for people to give us 5 minutes of their application, and the first person up today is Mac McElwain from Methven, about the Methven Birdsong Initiative. Thanks, Dave. Well done. Just make sure he's set up.
Right, apparently I am on air. So thank you for the opportunity to come and talk briefly about what we're trying to do. I'll just take 5 minutes to run you through kind of what lies behind the application, and then happy to take whatever questions you might have at the end of it. So we are the Methven and Foothills Birdsong Initiative, and this came from a dream, I suppose, about 6 months ago, of the observation that there didn't seem to be so much birdsong as there used to be in Methven, and you could either ignore that and just roll with it, or you could do something about it. And I thought, it's probably a good idea to actually do something about it. I asked around, and it seemed like there were a number of people who shared my view. So what's driving us is the lack of birdsong, and therefore the desire to do something about it. The general reduction of habitat, and the opportunity to create a legacy project that our kids and our grandkids and maybe even their kids would think that we did something good. And overall, I think it fits with the biodiversity requirement to improve the Methven environment. So there was a lot of things that drove this, but fundamentally, it just feels like the right thing to do. So we've charged into it. The desire, as I've said, is to bring back birdsong to the Methven area, and the action was to form the Methven Birdsong Initiative. You'll see down at the bottom right-hand corner of the slide there's a Lions logo. I'm a member of the Lions Club, and we're working in conjunction with the Lions using their charitable trust status and their incorporated society status to give the financials that we're talking about here some kind of rigour. We will act on the basis of being part of the Lions Charitable Trust, and as you're aware, there are many kind of considerations that go with that. We see there are two key elements that we have to address, or two key tasks, if you prefer. One is the creation of habitat, and then the protection of it, and the second is the question of predators and the desire to remove those things that would prevent us from achieving what we want. We've set up a structure. It looks kind of complicated, but there's a steering group of a half a dozen of us, and we see our role in that is to steer the thing, to set the strategy, and to make sure that the various tasks that are being asked to do actually come about. There's three tasks that you see there. GOH is the Garden of Harmony. Trapping is trapping, and right out to the right there is a conversation about doing something in the foothills. That's a separate conversation presently. Today I'm just here to focus on the Garden of Harmony and the trapping question. The Garden of Harmony is I'll come back to that. You'll hear this word community used a lot, and I think that the key thought I want to leave with you is that this is absolutely a community-driven thing. It's not just half a dozen people having a weird idea. That we felt that without community sport, we're nothing, and therefore we spend a lot of time talking to the Methven community about whether they agree with this idea or not. And I'm happy to report from numerical research that we've done that there's about a 90% approval of what we're trying to do. So we figure that's pretty good. Our first task will be to set up a trap library, and this is a work in progress which is kind of growing virtually daily. I'll give you some numbers in a minute about what that entails, but that's our driving task presently. Our second task is to extend this Garden of Harmony, and if you look at the overall map of Methven, you'll see a little red blob down towards the bottom there. That's the Garden of Harmony. If we zoom in on it a wee bit, you can see it now. It's starting to get a shape. It's an area of around 2 hectares, more or less in the middle of Methven. If we zoom in a bit more, you can get a picture of the shape of it. The main street from Ashburton to the north is the one running from the bottom of the page to the top, and it's even closer. You can see that it's next door to the Methven Resort Hotel. The actual Garden of Harmony is this area up at the top, which is currently planted in exotics and is there as a communication with a Japanese gentleman who set it up. Underneath that, on the bottom here, is a paddock of around 2 hectares, which has currently got 4 sheep and a ratty old ram in it, and a lot of rank grass. Our proposal is that, in conjunction with the district council, we take over that land and turn it into a native forest, which will support native bird life and ultimately native bird song. So that's the Garden of Harmony project. Our third task is to protect the habitat that's been created around the Methven walkway. And just briefly, again, there's a map of Methven. You can see in the coloured bits, the green and the purple, the Lions have created a walkway of about 12 kilometres around the town, and have been planting that with native species, which has now got to the point where it needs protecting. So there's kind of 2 or 3 main areas that we would like to have a go at. So that's why we've applied for funding. The technology is letting me down slightly. In the application, we asked for $30,000. I should have had a slide here, which I haven't, which said that to buy the traps, to set up the trap library, will cost in the order of $23,000. And the objective of that trap library is to give access to the community to trapping devices, with the overall objective of having a trap in every other garden in Methven. And that's probably about 250 or 300 traps. So that's the fundament of why I'm asking for this contribution. So that's a quick overview of what we're at. I'm very happy to take questions on the application.
Just 2 points of clarification. Is that 30,000 plus 10 that you're getting from the Methven Community Board, or is that included?
It's plus 10.
Plus 10?
Yes.
And who owns the land?
District Council.
ADC. Okay, thank you. Is there any other questions?
No, I'd just like to say that obviously we had the chance last time to ask questions, so most of them have been worked through the system via yourself and I assume Jamie. So we've got quite a bit of information over and above what you've presented. Thanks, Matt.
Thank you for your time. I really appreciate it.
Oh, Ryan Sidney.
So,
Can I just make an observation?
yep. Hi, Sydney, did we lose you then? Did you want to say something?
Yes, thank you. I just would like to point out a few things. I would like to advocate for this, for funds to be allocated to this project for a number of reasons. I see the potential for extension of the Garden of Harmony, and I would like to emphasize that there are many benefits in doing that, primarily because I particularly have used the garden many times as a living laboratory while I was at school, along with the other teachers. We take the kids there for many ecological lessons, and having a place like that is very beneficial. Just be aware that we also started the garden at the college, but since the Garden of Harmony is well established, it would be very good to have it extended and flourish. It's beneficial for both the residents, visitors there, and particularly for the students. So I would like to acknowledge the work that the community has done towards that project already, and that, how the importance of acknowledging and valuing their hands-on contribution, as noted onto the application, that they will actually put in a lot of hours in working towards that. And this is people volunteering, out of their weekends to do that. So I'm very in favor of this project, even though I know that the amount being requested is beyond what we have available to provide, but at least if we could partially give some funds to this project would be really good. And maybe perhaps, I don't know how the allocation works and when the time frame it is, but if there is perhaps an allocation for the next financial year, maybe if we cannot give a good amount this time, maybe the next financial year, but that's a technicality that I'm not sure about. That's all. Thank you.
Thanks, Sydney. Next year's funding is not certain yet. It's going through the long-term plan process at ECAN, so I think about July we will know what funding we have next year.
We'll still be there.
That sounds like a great project, but I do have a couple of questions. First, in the breakdown of cost, there is $8,000 for a website and Facebook presence. So is it included in the $30,000 that you are asking?
Correct.
Okay. And in terms of trap library, this committee already committed to funding a trap library in Staveley.
Yes.
And I was wondering if you are aware of that and if potentially you can also use that.
Yes, I'm aware of it. We have a good relationship with Gender Spa, who runs that thing, and I think the opportunity for collaboration is large.
Okay, thank you.
Good questions, Artie. What's next, Dave?
Do we have anyone here to talk to the Wakanui project? No. Okay. Ashburton Aquatic Park Charitable Trust. We have some people to talk to that. Thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak today. My name's Leandra Fitzgibbon and I'm one of the trustees of the Ashburton Aquatic Park Charitable Trust. I'm joined today by Les McCracken, who is our technical expert, but also has been a key advisor to the various Lakehood stakeholders over a number of years. So you'll probably find I defer many questions to Les today. The Ashburton Aquatic Park Charitable Trust was established in the 90s and was the original entity that was responsible for establishing the funding and consenting and completing the initial stages of the Lakehood development. The Aquatic Park Trust is now a joint venture partner of the Lakehood Extension Project and following the recent bloom outbreaks, a key member of the Water Quality Task Force. Our application today is to obtain funding to establish a trial based off recommendations that the Water Quality Task Force has been looking into off the back of dealing with various experts including NIWA and Tonkin and Taylor. And this is probably the point, Les, where I hand over to you and you can talk about the technical part.
Okay, what's driving this is basically the quality of water. Quality of water in Carters, which is high in phosphorus, high in nitrogen, and in storm flows is high in E. coli levels. And it's the phosphorus we're most concerned about here, because it's what drives cyanobacteria blooms, at least in Lakehood. So there are a number of technologies that will remove phosphorus from water. They're relatively new. They've been tried overseas. So we're looking to trial one here, which is the use of biochar, which acts chemically in a cation exchange process so the phosphorus sticks to the carbon. Carbon's used because it has very high surface area. So the proposal here is to carry out a trial where biochar, basically placed in mesh bags, are strung across the stream, and the number is calculated to give a volume for contact time with the water with the carbon. Most of the cost is involved. There may be a need to slightly modify the bed of the stream. It's dry at the moment in Carter's. There's a photograph in the application, and there's a need to once the creek starts to flow to monitor on a weekly basis before and after the biochar reactor. So we're measuring phosphorus in and then to the reactor, and then phosphorus that comes out and enters the lake. And the bed will potentially be used to trial some other technologies in the future. Trial will probably last about 2 months, depending on how the flows go in the creek and the sort of results we get initially. Obviously, if there's not much, if the removal isn't very high, at some stage we'll have to consider whether we drop the trial or not. The trial's not just about determining whether this works. We know this works from an exercise in the States, and there's a reference in there to a Silver Lake project. We're using a char that's produced in New Zealand, and potentially it's not treated to quite the same extent. The char and an activator that's used in the States is patented. It's not cheap. I think you've seen the costs here for the small treatment. We've been offered the American company that owns the technology has offered to treat water in Lake Hood for in the region of $80,000 to $100,000. So, and most of that's the char. So obviously there are benefits. The char that we'll be trialling is produced in Blenheim. And that's it. Very simple project. There's not a lot can go wrong with the project itself, the trial. What could go wrong is it may not work, but that's the reason for the trial.
Les, I'll just ask you a quick question. Testing the water in and out, will you also be able to test it out of Lake Hood into Ashburton River?
We do that monthly at the outlet as one of our consent conditions.
Okay, so you've got all that information there.
Yeah, this is a relatively small flow. Normal flow in Carter's is around 40 to 50 litres a second.
Right.
Lake outflows, we're normally running at anywhere between probably 250 and 550 litres a second, so it's a small component.
So you'll be able to have a picture of the water going in, the water in the lake, and the water going out?
Yeah, so into the char reactor,
Yep.
out of the reactor into the lake, and we routinely sample downstream of that in the canal it runs into, and we also sample at the outlet itself. And we're sampling the intake water we bring in from the river as well.
Thank you. Any other questions for
Thanks, Bill. Sorry for lateness. Les, in the report we've got here, it says your phosphate levels at 0.04 and nitrogen at 2.35 are high. What makes them high? Because I wouldn't call that high with my
They're
experience.
high in relation to our other water sources.
Right, high in relation to.
Yes,
Okay.
yes, yeah, certainly. In flood flows, they're significantly higher than that, but on average, we're probably only getting a flood flow once every 12 months, maybe a bit longer than that.
Thank you.
Thank you. That's a great presentation. Les, you sound like you've got a bit of a background in this sort of stuff. You're not sitting up there looking like a novice by any means.
I'm actually a retired mining engineer,
Yeah,
but I've
perfect.
spent all my life interpreting science into practical plans to mine things.
While you're talking about a trial down at Lake Hood, I see some relevance for other catchments in mid-Canterbury and then in sort of the wider Canterbury district. Are you aware of anybody else who's looking at phosphates being one of their key challenges that's exploring these types of options?
Not directly, but I'm a member of the task force on the lake too that's looking at the issues in the lake. But yeah, we see Lake Hood as potentially being a bit of a laboratory for these things. I think when I did the presentation at Lake Hood about end of February, I think it was, there were 26 water bodies under public health warnings as a result of cyanobacteria, and that was only Ecan, Otago and Southland didn't even look at the North Island. So yeah, there's a need for people to actually do practical things, real things, to try and make changes. From what I've seen, and I've spent the last 18 months buried in the computer, there are a lot of consultants looking at things and doing analyses and writing reports. There's not an awful lot of stuff getting done to try and change things. So direct applications to lots of places around Canterbury and probably around New Zealand.
Ian?
Just briefly, Mr. Chairman, I've got to leave in about 4 minutes, unfortunately. But just to make the note that this project is addressing one of the issues, one of the sources of polluted water into the lake, but it's not the sole solution for lakehood.
No.
But I support the notion of what they're trying to do. Can I also just say I don't support trying to find water for the Wakanui Creek, given that we can't find water for creeks that are still alive and have got water in them. It seems particularly stupid to keep trying to put money into finding water for other creeks, a creek that has been dead for 50 years or whatever it is. And I'm very happy with the presentation from Methven. So having said that, I'll have to leave.
Yeah, thanks, Ian. Thanks, yeah. Yep.
I just note we haven't got a printed version of the Hikio Hines High Country. Just it's not one of the three, so I don't know whether Ian's had a chance to read that or not. Thank you.
Bardi?
Since Lakewood is more of a commercial water body, I wonder if you looked at other funding stream for local property owners?
No, we didn't.
Okay, thank you.
Another good question. I will thank you. Leanne, did you have anything else to add, or you?
Just if I've understood the question correctly, I'd just add that in terms of the aquatic park objective, it's Lakewood as an asset for the whole community, and it's the hundreds of thousands of people or the tens of thousands of people in any 1 month that go out there and enjoy the lake. Yeah.
Me again. Thank you very much. The next one for us to consider is is Nicole online? Have we got?
Nicole and Mike.
Yep. Oh, yeah. Cool.
Hi.
Cool. Well, please go ahead and do a presentation for us. Yeah, Mike's there as well. Welcome.
Yep, Mike Salverson should be online, who's one of our catchment group members, and hopefully we have Fraser McKenzie in the room with you guys as well. So
yes, he's just
awesome.
coming to the desk.
Yeah, great, fabulous. So my name's Nicole Lamb. Apologies, I couldn't make it in person today. So I work part-time in a capacity as a consultant and have been with the Hikio Hines Hill Country Catchment Group for about 3 years. We initiated a catchment group, so covering the upper Hines Hill Country area. So we initially started prior to the McKenna-Brede Catchment Collective Incorporation, which initially was a group of farmers that drove together this creation of this catchment group. So we currently have a representation from 13 properties. We all pay a membership into a collective account that's held under the McKenna-Brede Catchment Collective. Over that time, it's been amazing to witness the collective relationships and being as we work forward as a community. So these are all 13 farming families that represent those properties across an area of about 14,000 hectares with stock units of between 80 and 100,000 stock units. So quite a significant land mass, and predominantly sheep, beef and deer farmers. So initially, when we created the catchment group and started having these early conversations, we sort of looked for guidance around the country of what catchment groups had been created, where had they driven, you know, how did they improve their environment, and where did they start. So we had some conversations with Laurie McKenzie from the Paumahaka Water Care Group, and one of those key adoptions and messages we took out of that was, you know, collecting some key data in detail, independently, implementing those actions to create those on the ground benefits to the water quality, and to actually work really closely with the regulator, or in their case ORC, but for us is to have that really good working relationship with ECAN. So we have today been implementing phase one of our baseline water quality testing program. So we have got a couple of months to go till June, and we've done our 12 months. We contracted Lindsay Anderson from Timaru to come in and independently take 9 sites across our catchment. So if in our application, hopefully you have a map in front of you that shows that where ECAN test and have tested to date, I've got 2 sites within the North Hinds and the South Hinds, which is at the bottom, essentially, of the catchment. And there's no detail or data that shows the water quality in the upper catchment. So this has been a main driver for the farmers in the area to go, we need to understand where the water quality is in order to be able to enhance the environment. As a group, we did look at a lot of offers of consulting advice and things, but it came at such a huge price beyond the budget. So as a group and the collective knowledge within the farmers, we sat down and worked through 9 sites we held as important. So the Hikio Hinds catchment has got a number of intermittent and ephemeral waterways, and due to the hill slopes, they basically are influenced by rainfall. So periods of drainage, flooding events become tributaries to both the North and South Hinds rivers. So again, those ECAN sites have some triggers at the bottom of the catchment, but without knowing further up the catchment, it's you know, a needle in a haystack to really know where to put in and advance some mitigations. So with our phase 1 collective, we have been able to identify some hotspots where as a group we'll now work through identifying some mitigation. So we're working with Dr. Brent Painter from HH Wet and closely with Shirley Hayward and Kimberly Dines from ECAN around, you know, what does that look like? How do we influence those water tests, and what could be some of those underlying causes of that? So whether it's implementing fencing, riparian planting and sediment traps, or I'm very keen to hear more about the biochar example that we've heard just earlier. So as contained with our initial application, we really request your consideration for the monetary support for phase 2. This is obviously co-funded by the catchment group members, which this year would be a $20,000 to go towards that, along with a requested $12,800 from the zone committee. I suppose I also just wanted to add, apologies if you can hear my daughter crying in the background. Yeah, I just wanted to finally add, I suppose, while we're collecting this data and driving this detail, catchment activities haven't stopped. We're really active within that small catchment group around, you know, creating further areas where we can identify environmental benefits for our ecosystems. So from fencing and riparian planting to eroding areas being fenced off and planted, enhancing wetlands and that beautiful wetland sequence we have there. Fraser's got a beautiful one. And driving towards our farm assurance programs, we have a lot of our members that are, you know, really jumping aboard some of these critical programs to manage their environment and that they live and work in as well. So I will throw to Fraser and Mike if they want to add anything further, and then take questions.
Yeah, no, I think Nicole's covered pretty much, but yes, Yeah, we're quite a small group. It's hill country. It differentiates from the rest of the Hinds catchment, and it's John Chapman from Maria really was the instigator of a project, and yeah, it's just rolled on in the last 3 years. So yes, no, it's been good.
Have we any questions?
Yeah.
Mike. Go ahead, Mike.
Yeah. Okay then. Yeah, I'd just like to add the area is the same as what was initially, I suppose, carved off in Plain Change 2, which is, for those not in the know, it's between the north and south branch of the Hinds River above the RDR, just to make it plain. So this is an area where the nitrogen levels are consistently on the north branch consistently really quite low for nitrogen and phosphorus, and the south branch, which includes the main basin, which is sort of, I suppose, centred around Upper Downs Road, it's slightly higher, but the mean level is still sort of on an annual basis around one part per million. So when compared to the rest of the Hinds, it's relatively low. Also, as far as water testing goes, ECAN obviously have a huge amount of data across the whole of Canterbury, but we've only got, to bring it down to our own area, we've only got these 2 sites at the bottom of our patch, and it's the same across Canterbury as well as other groups, is that although ECAN have got that huge amount of data, it's actually got large amounts of gaps in it as well. And I suppose it depends how local you want to go. And we have found 1 or 2 sort of interesting things. Most of the sampling points, there's a couple next to the road, so for ease of access. And the other points are where creeks that come off the south, particularly the south branch of the Hinds, where creeks come off there and they divide into other creeks. So you've got Limestone Creek and the Gawler Stream and the Surrey Stream, and we've got sample points just above the confluences of those creeks where they join, so we can try to know where problems might exist and where problems don't exist. And then the other thing, of course, we've got is large numbers of ephemeral streams that flow in wet years, and particularly in winter time. So I think it is important to build on the data we've got, because 1 year's data or 2 years' data doesn't really provide a big enough picture.
Just a quick question. Good presentation. Nicole, you obviously know your stuff. Nitrate testing machines, are they something you're looking at as well? Like Phil Everest setup that he's got down the bottom?
Yeah, so with the data that we have been able to collect over the last 10 months, we really have quite low nitrogen levels. So we have an influence of sedimentation, some E. coli, and really it's that obviously the natural flowing and high periods of rainfall that create those ephemeral streams to flow. So I suppose from differing from the lower catchment, the lower Hinds catchment, we really are focusing around a sediment and phosphorus issue more so than the nitrogen. So that's what's come through in our 10 months to date, which is exciting, but sort of isolates those key testing from a nitrogen perspective.
Thank you. Any other, Ange?
Just quickly, because I obviously won't be able to vote on that one, I'll have to abstain, but from an observation point of view, the groups come together really well, really quickly, very collaborative. There was a lot of work went into that site selection for ones they're going to choose, but I think as a bit of background, one of my very first zone committee meetings was on Akawa Downs. Nick Francis, co-chair of that group. We had a field visit up there. They were recipients of Immediate Steps funding, exceptional land and water stewardship over 40, 50, plus years. So the intergenerational component of what that catchment group has been doing there historically and then have committed to going forward I just want to say that it's pretty exceptional, and that group should be very proud of what they've achieved to date. And yes, they're very ably facilitated by Nicole, who's she's got a lot of skin in the game and a lot of knowledge that she can share.
Great.
Thanks, Ange.
Thanks, Ange, for that. Thanks, Mike and Fraser and Nicole. And so we'll now work out how we're going to allocate the funding. And someone will be back to you.
I'd just like to add that,
Yep,
like, we're the landowners, but Nicole's the driver of a bus, really. She knows when the application needs to go, and if it was up to us, we'd have missed a deadline and all these sort of things. So you know, Nicole's made a great job. Yeah.
Thanks, Fraser.
Okay, thank you, guys.
So what I'd like to do now is attempt to share my screen. I'm now part of this Teams thing.
Sorry, Dave, are they welcome to stay or welcome to go, or what are you suggesting there? How do you usually?
It's a public forum, so
Yep, cool.
it's up to them here. So, oh, sorry, who's got a hand?
Sydney.
Oh, you go ahead, Sydney, while I figure out the technology.
We can do these.
Oh, I had a question for Nicole. Just out of interest, in the map, there is like those two dots. Is that where you're collecting the surface water quality?
That's their existing ECAN sites.
Oh, right. Okay.
Yeah, so just
And-
at the bottom, of the catchment.
And out of interest as well, just on those 10 months that you collected, how many of those 10 months that you had the dry, that you couldn't actually have any sample?
Yeah, so over the last 3 months, that Foothills has really been hit by probably the lowest rainfall in, close to 10, 15 years. And so we have had a couple of sites that haven't been able to test the limestone goes underground, and I think it was the Gawler as well. So we have had those 2 months. So I think with the data collation, we are really finding some trends around what happens when it goes dry. So, I suppose the first thing when you do water quality testing is you avoid flooding and when there's no flow, but we actually need to understand those effects too. And I suppose that brings into the whole climate resilience understanding as well. So we have got some key data before things go dry and obviously as they restore. And there's a lot of, visual understanding now too from our photos that we're collecting at each site as to that recovery through the flow of each of these streams and tributaries. So we're focusing on the main ones and as Mike suggested, using those confluences to isolate which direction to go. So, yeah.
Oh, very good. Well done.
Thank you, Sydney. Cool. Thanks very much. We'll pop out.
Okay, thank you very much. Appreciate it. Okay, so I thought to make it a bit easier, I've
cheers.
I've popped up a spreadsheet there for people to look at, which has down on the bottom line you can see available funding 30,615.03 cents. As we populate this column here, the funding recommended, it'll total up. And hopefully we need the balance to get to zero, and that's the money spent. So I thought this is an easy way for us to look at what we're going to allocate here. I'm not sure how you want to go through, but we're going to start from the top.
Well, I thought Claire could lead this.
Okay, well, kind of agree with Ian that the feasibility study is probably not the best bang for our bucks in this instant. For the Birdsong Initiative, I do like the project. I question $8,000 for a website and Facebook presence, especially now with AI. You can set a website up in an hour, and those sort of things I feel like could be done on a voluntary basis. Agreeing with Addie about the trap library, if we can't see some synergies between Stavely and Methven there, and also just getting individual homeowners to purchase their own trap. I've purchased my own trap for the Port Hills, so if they are enthusiastic about the project, then an investment of 50, $100, depending what they're after, seems reasonable. So I would probably want to give them around 10K towards the plantings and some for the trap library if that, but I would prefer it to go towards the actual Garden of Harmony. For the Carter's Creek, I'm quite enthusiastic about that. I think biochar, there's a lot of potential to use biochar in many different ways, as well as like in an agricultural context. Biochar itself can be used as a solution for the slash problem that we have with our forestry. So I think looking for avenues to use biochar and encourage the use of biochar is really good. This is a trial that other catchments, other waterways can learn from. It's relatively low investment, so I support giving the full funding to that one. And then, another 10, the remaining going to the Hekio Hines. I think the number of community members that are involved and again, the outcome of that is going to be more beneficial than, the Methven Bird Project or the Carter's Creek, or Wakanui Lagoon.
Let's see how that looks.
So that will be, there's 10, 1, 3, 2 left. So
Yeah.
I think Claire said the bottom one should go the balance, or...
Yeah. There's a 3 cents left if we did that. We could give them 3 cents as well.
Claire, I think you've explained it very well, and I couldn't argue with any of that. The one question I'd have, whether Artie or Claire could answer it, I agree about that trapping being a bit of a double up, but I suppose 10,000 is a reasonable number. Otherwise, we give them a bit less and give a bit more to the other ones. But
Yeah.
it is a community; it's an urban project which we don't do too many of. So, so are you happy to leave it at 10 rather than chop it a bit, or doesn't matter too much, does it?
I mean, maybe it makes more sense to just fund the Hekio Hines completely, but yeah, I think it's a bit, either way is I'm comfortable with.
Right. Artie, what you got a comment?
Well, I've given some thought to all of those. In terms of the aquatic park, I just wondering if between natural water resources and artificial one, we should prioritize one over the other. But beside it, I don't have a specific thought. In terms of the birdsong initiative, I agree with Claire that the 8,000 for our bird web present seems a bit removed from our normal mandate. And I also wonder about the trapping library because between that and the one that we already committed to in Severely, we're talking about 50% of our funding solely for trap libraries. So I do think that we shouldn't commit beyond what we already committed in Stavely and have them potentially use that trap library. But it's a bigger question for me because there is a question whether we as a committee, part of our plan is biodiversity, but the question is whether it's biodiversity in relation to water resources or biodiversity in general. If it's biodiversity in general, we do have some overlap with the Biodiversity Advisory Committee and funding by the Ashburton Council for biodiversity. So I think that's something we should consider for going for the future in regards to what we do in terms of action plan, in terms of biodiversity, how wide our scope is. And finally, in terms of the Wakanui Beach, since I've joined the committee, it's always came back on the table one time after another, and it seems like the local Runanga are really in favor of prioritizing this project. So I do think that it's good to potentially put it to rest once and for all through this feasibility study to see if it's feasible or not, instead of keeping discussing it over and over and over again towards years to come.
I just say, Artie, I think the local Runanga are not supportive. They were supportive of it in planting and water. When they found the water was too hard, they've walked away from it.
I see. My mistake. I thought that Leswell always said it's really important.
No, once, or when our partner and co, whether they had two different views within their two different Runangas, I'm not sure.
I
But
see.
they said because the water was difficult.
Okay.
That walked away, but all your points are great. Thanks, Ange.
Just to pick up on a couple of the points. So the question that Artie's asking around the biodiversity and the crossover with Ashburton Biodiversity Advisory Group, I think there is a strong Mahinga Kai component in our action plan, and I think this ties in really nicely with that. So it is biodiversity, whether it's terrestrial or water. I think it's a bit hard to tease them out. So I'm supportive of where we sit, having sat around both of those tables. If we add together, like Artie said, the trapping library at 15,000 and the 10,000 bird songs received from Methven Community, that's 25,000 that's sort of been invested in trapping and bird song. I know it's a long area, the foothills, but that investment seems relatively substantial. Support your idea in terms of looking for some investment. Obviously, I've got to declare, I think, do I? The Hekio Hines Hill Country one? Yeah. In fact, I do. I have. Can we make that official? It is to the catchment group. I think last time with Janine, because it was a person.
You can't vote.
I won't vote on that one. The Lakewood thing actually really excites me. That practical, real things to make change versus consultants, I think, is a point that can't be overlooked. And Les has got some pretty extraordinary skills there. Trial has relevance beyond just this one, and I think it would be quite cool if the Zone Committee was seen to be leading the way in some of these discussions. So I'm fully in support of that one. And in terms of Wakanui, I mean, for the first half of our meeting, we talked about consents and water and allocations, and for all of that reason, I'm really struggling to try and, until we've resolved that, struggling to see whether now's the time to be investing $15,000 in Wakanui. And I do note it's got Jen referenced through there quite a bit, so what her role could look like going forward would need some clarification also.
Mayor Brown, have you?
Sorry.
Yeah, I'm not worrying about the trap library, 20k for traps in that small area is a lot of traps. So, so you could drop that back a bit. Biochar, yes, and the water quality testing for the triple HCG, yeah, double, quad, what is it? There's 4 of them, isn't it? H's. Yeah, no for the feasibility for me. Yeah. And also, we've given a few traps out over the time, smart funding for it. Do we ever get any feedback back as to how many little critters are being caught, and are the traps still being used? What feedback do we get? If we give traps away, I think we need something back that what they're catching. If they're catching nothing's fine, but they're still able to catch things, they're still active, they're still working. It would be handy to know in years to come.
That's a good point, and we'll make a note, David, for Jamie, that we see if we can write to the people that we've given some trap money to and see what's going on. Thanks for that, Neil. Sydney, have you got how do you see things?
Yeah, so I would like to start talking about the Wakanui, and I would like to acknowledge that there is an ongoing debate surrounding this project, and mainly because there's people that believe in the project, and I think as a zone committee, we have to listen to their needs, and even though it's a repeated feedback that we've been hearing, is because the community has spoken, and I think as a committee we should listen. I also understand about the water review. It's bringing a lot of pressure about water in this where we are at now, right now. So I was just wondering that we should not just say, no, we're not going to give you this fund, but we are exploring other ways that we could have this feasibility to see if we can, whatever they want to do, by ECAM. Because if they are going to look into concerns about water up on the catchment, probably will have an impact at the bottom of the catchment. So maybe include the Wakanui into their review and see if this job can be done by ECAN, but formally, so we can say to those people that have put a lot of effort already into this project that they are not alone. We are listening to them, but we're trying to find ways that they can have this project done. Like I agree with, sorry, I forgot who said about we needed to actually find out if it's possible or not, so that we can say, no, we tried everything, we explored every possibility, and it's not possible. We need to find different solutions. So I would like that this not to be like put to bed once and for all, but I would like it to put in as we are going to talk to ECAN and see if they can do this feasibility study, and as an ongoing conversation, because of the work they put into it and they believe that they have into this project. Wow, that was okay. I am in favor in all of the other projects, and I think we should maybe equally give the money to them. I think that what the Myth and Birdsong has asked us, unfortunately, we cannot provide the whole amount, but that $10,000 is a very good amount. And all the other two projects seems really good, and I'm in favor of those.
Great. Well, I think that's all very good comments, and Dave, you've set out pretty well with the funding there, and clears. So, just on the Wakanui Beach, I know there is a report that Andrew Guthrie from ADC did about 4 years ago about how you can get water down there. So I'll get that hold of that, and we'll talk to ECAN about what they think they can do. So, as you say, we're not leaving them on their own, but we don't need to put any money into it, but we'll find out if there's a feasibility, and if they say there is, well then that could be a project for next year. But my understanding was that it's very difficult to do, and I'm pretty sure the Runanga's lost an appetite for it. But well, so to answer your question, Sydney will follow on all those comments you made, and then I think the way you set it out there, unless anyone disagrees, is a pretty good way to go.
I just think an additional component to Wakanui is the stop water race, the changes that's afoot there. So that's quite a big factor. So we don't know where that's going to land, but it's definitely part of bigger discussions. And I just wanted to make note, they talk about that's an important area for bird life, and absolutely it is. But I've spent quite a bit of time at the mouth of the Hines River recently, down in the Hapua. The bird life down there is phenomenal. It's a little bit probably out of sight, out of mind. It's not as frequently or as accessible as Wakanui. So the lagoon, there was a bittern spotting down there recently. So along our coast, well, there's some challenges at Wakanui. There's some other amazing things happening. So I think we keep context around that. I think that's important.
Could I just ask you to think about with the Hill Country catchment group that asked for 12.8, and here we've got 10.1. Will that stop them going ahead, not having that extra few hundred, couple of $1,000s, or should we take a little bit off the Methven one? And
I support taking it off and fully funding them, and then the rest to Methven.
Okay.
sorry, taking it off which one?
Well, Methven and the other one. So Carter's Creek's got 10.48. Why don't we just make that 10? And eat 10 and take the balance off the Methven. Does that look like?
This one will be 12.826. So this one would have to come down to about 7,800 roughly.
If I remember, I haven't got my piece of paper with me, but wasn't 8,000 for plants?
No, it was only 34.
So it was only 3.
And the remainder will go to planting.
Oh, okay.
But I think we should tell them.
For plants
put
only.
more to planting, leave it at
Okay.
the 7.
Yeah.
I don't think we should.
7790 or something like that. Oh, what did I do then? 77,000. Didn't quite mean it that much. $20 I've gone the other way. So basically we want to give Carter's Creek 10 grand, 12 grand, the exact amount for Hekau Hines, and the remainder going to...
I would question if we don't just give the full full to Carter Creek as well.
Yep.
Suck that 400.
Okay.
Methane.
Yeah. 12, oops, 10, 483,
10, 483.
and then 462, 97.
Just put it zero and then it will show exactly how much.
Exactly. Put zero at the top.
We? Oh,
Make that zero.
right there, 0.
Zero.
Oh, sorry. Can't figure again. Oh, yeah. So 730603.
So for the resolution that Methven Lions Club, the 730603 is for planting.
Yes.
So Claire, are you
Cool.
happy to move the motion?
Yeah.
You put in your words.
That we're putting the funding towards fully funding Carter's Creek, fully funding.
I would have an individual
The-
individual resolution for each one. So I've got the
Cool.
piece to that I won't make you read out, that Methven Bird get 7306 towards planting, and then the Carter's Creek get the
Yeah.
full amount, and I'll put the full amounts in.
Cool.
I'll send them out to you to have a look.
We don't need to, we'll agree with it now.
Yeah, so it'll be the there'll be three
Yeah.
different resolutions, but you can move and second all of them. It's fine.
I just move them like that.
Move.
I move each motion.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
That's fine.
And
I'll
then,
second it because don't think Ange can.
Yeah.
Well, Sydney, you happy with that? You happy with that, Sydney? She sums up. So all in favour? Aye. Any against?
maybe just record that Ange abstained from voting on the Hickey or Hines water testing.
And also Mackenzie Lester's votes. Well, we don't need to mention that.
No,
Because
because
it was
it's
unanimous.
consistent with his
We've still
vote.
got the majority.
Yep.
Okay.
As long as we have a quorum.
One thing, Bill, just think about plantings. Some plantings have been done at Wakanui Creek over the years. Have we ever heard back how successful that's been?
Well, I've been down there last week or 2 weeks ago and not very successful. The salt water's got into them and it's a nice wee community down there, but it's just not going to grow. The plants aren't working, there's no water.
Okay. So we need to keep that in mind when we grant plantings anywhere, really, money for plantings, that they will survive.
I think Christian has looked at that planting and decided that the plan needed to change to more salt adapted plants in some places, but he has also reported back on some of the work that they've done, like the tree clearing and stuff there. Yeah.
Just wondering what happened with the river native plantings. Ashburton River native plantings. You said we were supposed to hear something.
Yes, I'm happy to speak to that. So they went ahead, they were successful in the last round, and then there was talk of wanting to do some significant weed control. It didn't manifest that Ross he didn't get a quote in time for this one, but also since then we've had some buy-in from the Ecan River engineering team to support that sort of project. So it may well be that there's another option on the table for that. Just while I've got the mic, Rangitata Revival update, if we could get something on that at some stage, Bill, that would be really good. Yeah, I understand there's been a couple of meetings lately. It'd be nice to find out where that discussion's at, because it is quite a high level, has quite a significant impact for our district.
Okay, well, thank you very much for your attention.
Just on the Rangitata one,
Yep.
should the zone committee have a presence on that group?
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Should the zone committee have a presence on that working group?
That has been asked before, hasn't it?
Well, they've got an office one, do they?
Yeah, we went to that presentation last year. Was
Ealing.
it? Yeah, at Ealing. Yeah, and I think that question has been put, but to no avail at this stage.
Well, what we'll do is we'll get Jamie to get in touch with them to get an update on where they're at.
I think it would be appropriate to get an update from Brad Edwards because our main concern last time was lack of community consultation, and I can't see anything that's changed since that concern. Hey, no. So important that we work on the no surprises approach on that one.
Okay, I'll close with Unihia. Unihia, Unihia, Unihia ki te uru tapanui o tani. Kia watia, kia mama, te nako, te tinana, tai wairura I te ao takata. Kora ra e rongo, whakaarie, aki ki wunga, kia tina, tina, hoie, huie, tai kie.